Welcome to Peace Now. My name is Trudy Quaife. I'm a member of Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. We're a local organization of friends and neighbors, and we've been advocating for peace and justice for well over a decade. I'm your host today, and I'm joined by Mickie Lynn.
Hi. Hello.
Thanks for being here, Mickie. Mickie's a well-known peace activist in the Capital Region. She's well known for her work with Women Against War, Grannies for Peace, and she also is an occasional blogger with Women Against War in the Times Union.
That's true.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself, Mickie. How long have you been a peace activist, and what motivated you to activism?
Well, I could spend the whole half hour on it, but I won't. I think the thing that I remember most is that when I was in the 5th grade, so I was like 9 or 10, I wrote a radio play, and it was about World War I, and it was about that poem in Flanders Fields. Mm-hmm. But I had one of the soldiers come alive, and he was very young, and he talked about his life. And I don't know why I felt it so keenly, but I was already very anti-war and anti-death, anti-killing. And so that's one of my early memories. There is one other thing that isn't so pleasant, and that is my parents both worked, and there was no such thing as family leave or anything. So I had a lot of different caregivers when I was young. Some of them were great, but some of them were horrible. And so that whole issue of power over people and what's fair, and if you're a little toddler and you have this big adult telling you what to do. So I think I became very rebellious about authority and very prone to stick up for the underdog. Mm-hmm. So there's that. And then the other thing is that I had 2 wonderful aunts. They were both my father's sisters. One was a 1st grade teacher, and she would take me into her classes sometimes, and we did a lot with poetry and self-expression, and she was very creative, and I think both my brother and I benefited from that a lot and learned to find ways to express our feelings and to let other people feel them too. There was that. And my other aunt was sort of a radical in many ways. One way was that she worked for Planned Parenthood, or no, not Planned Parenthood, it was Visiting Nurses of New York. And it was before birth control was legal, but she was there helping people with their family planning and other things. So she was very courageous in her own way when she was a young adult. Mm-hmm. So she was inspiring to me later in my life. I didn't know all that stuff when I was a kid. So those are some of the things. Mm-hmm. And then when I lived in Berkeley in the 70s, I became very involved with the women's self-help movement and very aware of the feminist movement. It was a little too late for me, but but it was still good. And so there's that influence through my life too.
Berkeley, California, that I guess is the home of a lot of people that became activists.
That's true, and I met Helen Caldecott there when she came to speak, and that really recatalyzed my, because I hid under my desk when I was a child. You know that, you probably didn't have to do that, but in New York City, yes,
we
duck
had to
and
do
cover,
that. Yeah.
So when I met her, it kind of really recatalyzed my feeling that nuclear weapons needed to be done away with, and so far we're still working on that.
Well, tell us a little bit about when you became an activist. What organizations did you work with, and what kind of issues did you work on in the past?
Well, in the way past, I worked on the civil rights movement in the late 50s and very early 60s, but in New York. I didn't actually go south. So that was one of the first things that I was pretty active in. And then I spent some time in Central America later, and I also worked, then I worked here with the Pledge of Resistance, and that was very important, and also with a group called the Compañera Project, which was women that both tried to raise the issues of what was going on in El Salvador and Guatemala, but also did projects where we helped women to have self-sufficiency and be self-sustaining, mainly in El Salvador. And then I was with Witness for Peace, a women's delegation in 1987 during the Contra War, and came back and tried to do as much as I could, and also encouraged my sisters on the delegation to do as much as they could. We had a newsletter for a while. We'd tell each other what we were doing, and so that was pretty important. Let's see, what else in this area?
Well, we can probably move on to the current projects, because you've got so much to talk about now that I don't want to.
Okay, thank you for giving me
some
pacing here.
Let's talk about what the issues are that you're working on now, and maybe tell us a little bit about why they're important to you.
Okay. Well, the ones that I personally am working on, although I'm working with several different projects, but the ones I'm personally working on are drone killings, because I feel that it's so unjust and so cruel and so important, because the victims are just out of the blue. They're, and because our government seems to justify it. So that's one, anti-drone work. Another one is anti-racism, and I'm really glad that now the Grannies for Peace are starting to work on that. And in fact, we just had our last Tulip Fest vigil. That was our theme, Black Lives Matter. And again, I think we have another chance right now to really call attention to so many things that are still going on because of all the lives that are being lost by, law enforcement killings in some cases, and mass incarceration. And I guess I'm trying to work on that, but at the same time I'm trying to work on my own understanding of how to be an ally, because it's not so easy.
No, it isn't.
Because we are privileged, we tend to take over, to say.
And racism is so ingrained, I think, in our culture. We don't even recognize it sometimes.
Yes, and I've found that in myself. I mean, being surprised at certain things because I had certain unconscious assumptions that I wasn't even aware of. So I think that the Friends meeting is doing a lot of good stuff with that. I've gone to 2 kind of storytelling events where people told stories about how they were affected by racism. And I learned a lot. It was a very non-threatening, non-dogmatic setting, but it was like very powerful. Or even when Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace did Howard Zinn's play.
Oh, right.
There was so much about racism and imperialism. And I still learned a lot, even though I thought I knew a lot.
Okay.
Oh, well, wait, there is one more, but now, all right. Well, militarism, really.
Militarism, yeah.
Because that's the core, in some ways, of Women Against War. And because it runs through our society. I mean, by the priorities and choices that we make, we deprive people of basic necessities, while at the same time we're kind of funding defense corporations all the time, and the military, which doesn't need to be so big and bloated to keep us safe. So those are the 3 things.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about drones. Why did Women Against War pick drones as one of the issues that they're concerned about? I think a lot of people come from the perspective of, well, these drones, our own military people aren't killed if they use drones, and that's kind of a simplistic picture, but I think that's how people see it. So could you just explain a little bit about the Women Against War perspective and why you think it's important?
Sure. Well, Women Against War is very focused on how war especially impacts women and children. So that goes throughout our work. And in this case, we started with Afghanistan. Well, first we started to try to prevent the war against Iraq. And I know Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace and Women Against War started at around the same time, before the war actually happened, to try and prevent it. And then we had all of the focus on Afghanistan and what was happening there, and we have a couple of members, including Connie Frisbee Hood, who's a wonderful photojournalist, and she actually was in Afghanistan many times. And then we had Fahima Vorgitz, who is an Afghani American woman who told us what was going on there. So we were very focused on trying to help the people of Afghanistan, did some projects. But then drones started killing people in Pakistan and in Afghanistan and in Yemen and,
all places
and in Somalia.
Yeah.
And where there were already wars.
Right.
But we thought, as you said, that this was the easy way, that there were no soldiers dying. Well, there might not be as many soldiers dying, but the number of enemies we're creating are fueling this endless war cycle. And we see that now in Syria and Yemen and in Iraq again. I mean, so that, and in other places, but those are the ones that are so dramatic. And Libya, where we removed a leader, but now look at what's going on there. It's leaderless. It has 2 different governments, and people are suffering and dying. And
many civilians.
Many civilians. And then that's the other thing. But back to the drones. So then we started to make coalition with some other groups. And Leah Bolger has this wonderful, she's from Veterans for Peace, yeah. And so she started this drone quilt project, and we hosted it here last fall, and along with that, Maureen Oman arranged for us to have a play about a drone pilot, a woman, and called Grounded, and we had a drone replica that Nick Motorn in New York made, and it's a 1/5 scale, perfect scale. I don't know how he does it, and he's made many of them. But anyway, 1/5 scale MQ-9 Reaper. And so we've had that here. We had it here as part of the Drone Quilts exhibit, and we've had it around the area. And so I think when people look at that, they get a better sense of what that might look like or feel like. But anyway, I digress, because I was going to say that post-traumatic stress disorder is really knocking out some of our drone sensor pilots and our drone pilots like crazy, and we're finding out more about that. They might not be dying, but part of them is dying with the experience of actually seeing people die, like seeing a child run around the house just as they're detonating a bomb or a bicycle, or I mean, you name it, or just knowing that they've killed civilians is very, very traumatic for them.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, Women Against War is also involved with Grannies for Peace, right? Those are 2 sort of sister organizations.
Well, yes, Grannies for Peace is one of our projects, just like Beyond Afghanistan No Drones is the new name of our Afghan project. So that's where it kind of spun out from. And Grannies for Peace is another, and the Iran project is yet another. And we used to have others, but those are the 3 that are the most active right now, because it's they're the most vital, they're the most urgent. So Grannies for Peace is my favorite, I have to say, in some ways, because as a granny-aged person, I'm a step granny, but I don't have young grandchildren. So I do work with a lot of women, though, that are in their 70s, 80s, and even with
90s,
Pat Beadle, 90s, and Sue Clark nearly 90. And we're considered harmless. We're considered, grannies. I mean, what could be safer and nicer than a granny? And people listen to us.
They do, and they respect you.
Sometimes, most of the time,
Most of the time.
Most of the time they respect us. So that gives us a lot of latitude, a lot of leeway. And we have some wonderful props makers in the Grannies. We have Mabel Leone, and I think you'll probably see a picture sometime in this video of the puppets that she's made. They're huge and they're beautiful, but we have Kim Kennedy, who does banners, and she does the most amazing posters, and so does Mabel. So we have props. We have so many beautiful props that kind of add to...
It's really more like art.
Oh, it is art, yeah. And so it draws people in, and it again, it opens them up. It seems harmless. It seems interesting, and then whap. So this last Tulip Festival, we did a Black Lives Matter, Racism Breaks Grannies' Hearts, and end racism now. Well, I think it's going to take more than now, but
it's a good start, though.
It's a good start. So that was our theme for this spring.
Mm-hmm. So what about the Iran project? What is Grannies for Peace or Women Against War doing with that now? Is that an active project now?
Oh, it's very active.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for a long time, I'd say since 2006, anyway, we've been lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
We meet periodically with we never get to meet with our senators, but we meet with their staff. But we meet with our actual representatives. I remember meeting with Mike McNulty, and now it's Paul Tonko,
mm-hmm.
and some people have met with Chris Gibson. So we meet with them, we lobby them. We also lobby with letters. I now know the legislative aides, and I write directly to them. I have no idea how effective it is, but they claim
it's important.
We try, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's lobbying. Every year we have a vigil,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in the food festival. I Love New York Food Festival, so it's actually coming up. We don't know when this will be shown, so it probably will be over, but
Yeah.
but we'll have our big, huge banners that Mabel, Leon, and Kim Kennedy and I made years ago that say, Iran next, no war, no way,
Mm-hmm.
and they've been very important. But this year we also have this hope of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was just
Mm-hmm.
ratified,
Mm-hmm.
and ratified by the UN and ratified by the EU, and now we're waiting on our wonderful Congress
Yeah.
to approve or disapprove, and it's a really big fight. So we're doing a tremendous amount of lobbying around that,
Mm-hmm.
and in fact we'll have a table where people can actually call their representatives right from the plaza if they want to, and if they can get through, and we'll have leaflets that give information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think we're about at the halfway point here.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about what Women Against War are working on
Well,
before we move on
yes,
here?
I guess I'd like to say that some of the things that make us unique are, first of all, our focus on women and children,
Mm-hmm.
and how we try to bring that in. And the reason I have Kuan Yin here, the Chinese goddess of compassion, is for that reason, because we try to open people's hearts and tell them that these are other human beings just like us, even if they're being called names like terrorists, or even if racism is involved and they're not valued. They are people, and we need to stop killing them.
Mm-hmm.
So that business, that focus on women and children and their lives, and of course men who die, but men are always focused on because they're the soldiers, and sometimes they're considered the terrorists or the militants. But women and children are suffering right along with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we deal with that. We always have music. I mean, it's not wonderful music, it's not performance music, it's song leading. And that's very important, because when people sing, that opens their hearts too, and it inspires them, it gives them energy.
Mm-hmm.
And we always have art, as you've said. And we've also done some poetry. We've had our Pieces of Peace,
Mm-hmm.
which dealt with, drama, poetry, art, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then we, once in a while, we do services at the Unitarian Church where we do a sermon and we do songs again. We try to do music whenever we can.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see what else I wanted to say about that. I think those are the things that make Women Against War unique in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't show movies like you guys do, and like Schenectady Neighbors for Peace does, or I guess in some ways the Sanctuary for Independent Media in Troy takes all of those elements and combines them
That's
together and gives us a wonderful chance to either be there in person, or then they stream everything on their website. So I'm hardly ever there anymore, but I can still watch
Mm-hmm.
and listen.
Mm-hmm.
And they open up people with jazz and dance and everything. I mean, I think it's very important to reach more than somebody's head.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Well, Women Against War is such a wonderful organization. I'm just so impressed with all that you do. I'm just in awe of all the projects that you work on and all the things that you do. And we've got at least 10 or 12 minutes left here to talk about the blog, which is another project that Women Against War is responsible for, and you're one of the primary bloggers, and I'm always so impressed. I know one of your recent blogs, you talked about the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran, and
oh, you read them.
and it's so and you do such a great job of researching the subject and providing people with so much information that I thought it was really an important thing for us to talk about. So maybe you could talk about how did Women Against War decide to go ahead and do a blog?
Well, it's an interesting story. In January of 2008, we met with Rex Smith and Mike Spain, the editor and the managing editor of the Times Union, and we were there to lobby them to start looking at opponents of our Iran policy and to stop seeing Iran as the enemy and to use alternative sources, because they always used the AP. And there was Reuters, and there was all kinds of, and they never did any of that. And they also, in their opinion pages, didn't publish alternative points of view about peace rather than threats and sanctions and so on. So I think it was, let's see, there were 4 of us. So it was Pat Beadle, Priscilla Fairbanks, Maury Easter, and I. So we met with them, and then we went to, this was really interesting, we went to their afternoon, front page planning meeting and editorial meeting, and that was fascinating how they did it, and it was different from what I expected. It had to do a lot with space and what the alternatives were, and it didn't have as much to do with their own choices in some ways as I thought that it would. So anyway, then we went back and met with them again after the meeting, and Rex Smith, I think it was Rex Smith, could have been Mike. Anyway, they said, well, we're not going to be able to do all these things you asked us to do, but how about if you express the alternative point of view, if you got a blog on our pages?
Oh, great.
And so we had 2 or 3 meetings. At the beginning, we had about 9 or 10 people that started writing. And I became the administrator in the sense that I edited the comments and moderated them and showed people how to post and took questions about help, help, what's going on here, and kept up with the changing software. So we did, one interesting thing though is we started this process, I started it with Michael Huber, the webmaster, in February of that year. And he was not that welcoming. We had to keep reminding him that this was the idea of the editors. And he was saying, well, we're all for peace. What can you do that would be different, that would be interesting? So I convinced him. And in the meantime, we practiced on WordPress so that we could use the software. So it wasn't until August that we actually began blogging. And then, as I said, we had 9 people. And slowly over time, it's dwindled, but we've gotten a few new ones. And so now it's 4 of us. And we started with 3 teams, so we would alternate every 3rd month we would write. And at first there were 2 of us on each team or more. And now we still have 3 teams, but we have 2 teams of 1 and 1 team of 2. But there is one other thing. Lynn Miller Lockman is a novelist, a young adult novelist, and she's very much involved with, we need diverse books, dealing with authors of color and authors from different countries and so on. And she's very oriented towards peace and justice too, but in a different way, from a literary point of view. So she's one of our bloggers.
Oh, good.
So we get a lot of good stuff about what's going on in literature, plus we get a lot of readers through her Twitter account and all kinds of other things. So we have a very wide audience, and it's only been in the last couple of years that I've been able to see where we're being read. And mostly in the United States and Canada, but I was surprised to see how many different countries we reach. And that changed my point of view. I used to think, well, if we don't get many comments, it means nobody's interested. But now I see we're being read all over the world, and I don't care so much about comments, although we still get a lot of comments. But I care mostly that this is going out, and in some ways it's also creating a different image of what Americans
I think so.
think
I think
about the
that's true.
world
Yeah.
and what they believe.
And you all do such a professional job, and you include photos. It's so impressive. It looks like it's done by a staff of 20.
It's done by a staff of one, each person that's doing their article.
Yeah.
And it's fun, though.
Mm-hmm.
At least I find it a creative outlet, because we do have visuals, and that's fun. I mean, that makes it. And sometimes we put in poetry or music lyrics and other things like that. How are we doing on time?
Well, I think we've got about 5 minutes left.
Whoa.
So let's kind of talk a little bit about. We've talked about some of the things here. What are some of the issues you've addressed in the blog?
Well, I know you thought of asking me that question, and it's really diverse, because again, it depends on the point of view of the person who's writing.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we get social justice issues.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we get the very issues that Women Against War is so focused on. But then with Lynn, sometimes we get issues that are raised by young adult authors,
Mm-hmm.
and then she ties them into what's going on in our country.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's very surprising. And then the other thing that people really like to read, it seems, from the number of viewers, is they like to read photo essays of things that we actually are doing. You know, they
Mm-hmm.
like to see what are people actually doing in our community or in our country. And then once in a while, they like to see things like Christmas in Australia and
Mm-hmm.
anti-drone demonstrations that took place there on the beach in the middle of Christmas, or
Okay.
other things like
All right.
that.
All right. Well, we've only got a couple minutes left here, so let's talk about how people who would like to get more information. Where do you suggest people go for their news? What are some of the places you go for your news?
Okay, well, there are a dozen or more alternative
Mhm.
sites that I visit, but I
Mhm.
think if you want to get started and you haven't done this before,
Mm-hmm.
two are very good. One is democracynow.org.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that that's so good is because they usually interview other people that are experts or that
Mm-hmm.
that have information, and they give you so many links so that you can begin to expand.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one of a similar nature, but not quite as comprehensive and much shorter and only once a week, is Counterspin.
Okay.
And Counterspin looks at the media and how they haven't gotten the story, and,
Mhm.
and talks about the things they've missed, and usually interviews two people on the subjects that are of interest. And that one is, let's see, it's on the FAIR website, which is fair.org.
Well, I think we've included that, and
Okay,
people
so
will
I
be able
won't
to
tell
see
you
that
more.
in the
Okay,
credits.
because
So,
there is a slash.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, that's
okay.
so. We're out of time.
Whoa!
So I appreciate your being here today so much, Mickie, and you'll have to come back and we'll have to talk about this some more. And thank you so much for all the work you do in your wonderful blog, and I hope people will check your blog out at the Times Union. And thank you all for joining us, and please join us for future shows where we'll talk more about drones, and we'll talk about how the economy has been affected both locally and nationally by the cost of war. Thank you.
Thanks, Trudy.